adding to my confusion. One clue was the giant tattooed eagle on my dad's right upper arm. When I was 8 years old and my dad was reading, I sidled up to him and remembered asking, "Well, Dad, can I just stand here next to you while you read?" And he'd say, "Sure, son." I wanted to have a good look at that tattoo, that giant eagle, and that was in 1966. Tattoos were rare then. Only sailors and ex-convicts had them, rather, and certainly not on women as is so common today. "Dad," I asked, "why did you get this tattoo?" And he said, "Well, it's my Navy tattoo, son. We all got one in the Navy." I ran my finger slowly over the complex lines in the eagle's wings. In the middle of the eagle was a box with a word in it. Breaking the silence, I spelled the short word out, B-E-T-T-Y, Betty. "Dad, who is Betty?" I asked my dad many uncomfortable questions over my young years, and he would say, "Listen, never be afraid to ask me anything, Mark. If I know, I'll tell you, and if I don't know, we'll look it up." Well, this was the first of many uncomfortable questions, and Dad looked at me and he put his book down. "Mark, son, I'll tell you who Betty was, but please never mention this to your mother. My mum's name was Eileen, and Dad and Mum had been married 16 years at this time in 1966, so I'd never thought of anybody else in my father's life except my mum, Eileen. But my dad added, "It's not that she doesn't know the story, son, but it bothers her greatly and it'll hurt her to think about it, so please don't mention it." Well, Betty, son, was my true great love. She was a beautiful, wonderful woman in Durban, South Africa, and my ship would stop in Durban every 2 to 3 months and stay for 3 to 14 days at a time. I was more in love with Betty than any other woman in my entire life. She was wonderful. I remember my dad's eyes would trail off into a gaze, his voice soft and conspiratorial as he confessed this to me, and he gulped a sad little swallow before continuing. "You know, I saw her at every opportunity, Mark, I could for 3 years, and we were crazy for each other. I promised at the end of the war I would come and get her and marry her, and in June 1945, after Germany surrendered, and I had saved up enough money to get on a ship from Southampton, England after my discharge, and go get her in Durban. A trip like that took 3 weeks, and I was so excited. But when I got there in Durban, her father refused to let her see me and had men forcefully and firmly tell me never to contact her, and that I would never see her again, and that was that, and that I would never be allowed to marry her and not to try any more. And I'm afraid I never did see her again." "Why, Dad, why?" I was shocked. He said, "Because Betty was gentry, son. Her dad owned a huge farm, a lot of land, a business, and he determined that no poor son of a chimney sweeper was going to marry his daughter. It was the class system that all England grew up under, and I was from the poorest of the poor, and she was from the well-to-do, and that, unfortunately, in those days was simply that. I loved Betty more than anyone else in the whole world save my mother." I remember the finishing of that story. Dad had moisture in his eyes on this confession. He had many pleasant stories of his time in the Navy, getting dunked in the ocean in a big net when passing over the equator, and always warm-hearted stories of hijinks between he and his mates. But when on those occasions I persisted with, "Tell me about battles, Dad, tell me about the battles that when you fought. What was the closest you came to getting killed?" His eyes became cold and distant. He rarely spoke of those things, but occasionally, because I was too young and insensitive to realize he did not want to think of those times, his voice would become grave and slow, and he breathed in heavily, and he intoned, "The screams of the wounded, my mates going on for hours, throughout the night on a battlefield or out at sea until they died, haunted you. They haunted you, son, for days, nights, months, and years. If you saw a close mate killed or maimed, arms ripped off by exploding shrapnel, or," he would pause, and I could see he was getting very kind of choked up, "or worse, I saw worse on the field of battle." His voice trailed away, and then I understood it was time to change the subject, but I always came back with more questions to disturb him. "What was the closest you came to getting killed, Dad?" He'd look at me with an air of resignation. "Well, okay, I'll tell you, but I don't like to talk about those times. When my ship was taking supplies to Malta, the Luftwaffe was waiting to attack our convoy as we approached. Stuka dive bombers and Messerschmitt fighter aircraft brought down a furious assault on our ship and all the others. I remember running like a son of a bitch, and believe me, my dad never swore normally, so this was important. He said I was running to my gunnery station and looking right ahead of the Messerschmitts coming right down at me, strafing the ship and the crew, and was right in his gun sights, and then it was zip, 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 a torrent of bullets. I could almost feel them go to my left side into the ship, all missing me by inches or less. I got to my gun and fired at them as the fight went on for a furious 45 minutes, but I didn't get hit, though some of my mates did. My best friend on board died that day from bullet wounds." On another day, when he agreed to answer my pestering questions about war, he said, "Son, the noise of the guns, the rockets, the bombs, the machine gun fire, the mortars, the cannons, all this deafening racket going off all at the same time was maddening. It was stupefying in a way that no movie or book can convey. It would make you mad nuts if you were to hear it for too long, and sometimes I thought I would go insane just from the torrents we would hear." And then, like all those other difficult conversations, he would be quiet and seemingly far, far away. By the time I was 14 and had read dozens of those Ballantine paperbacks on war, my father, mother, and I would watch a very gripping series from BBC on Canadian television called The World at War, airing originally from 1970 to 1974, but it's rerun all the time on A&E to this very day. Every Sunday night a new episode aired, and I was mesmerized by all this authentic film footage of adrenaline-fueled combat in the air, at sea, and on the battlefield. One day, Mom and Dad had a big, long discussion before allowing me at 14 to watch a very special, explicit episode of The World at War. Mom and Dad argued for hours early in the day over whether I should be permitted to watch it. I quietly tried to overhear their debate from in the TV rec room from my bedroom. And then at the end of the discussion, my dad said with finality, "That is what happened. This is the truth, and he will need to know." So at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, this episode was even more serious than usual, the narrator's voice grim and serious, and I was indeed gripped by horror while watching it. It was about concentration camps, extermination camps. It was about Jewish people being rounded up, executed by machine gun, put in huge torture camps and gassed in concrete brick rooms. Naked, emaciated women, children, and tiny men humiliated and degraded before being incomprehensibly executed. Thousands upon thousands. Their nakedness confounded me. I had not seen humans paraded naked before and was shocked at that. And then the corpses of the dead piled high, and the long rows of naked women being machine gunned into trenches that they had to dig only moments before their imminent death. I was crying after 20 minutes of watching this, but I watched it all. My mom glowered at my dad as she was disgusted by the moment, and my dad sighed as I cried and burst out questions to my sweet dad about how that my sweet dad could not answer for me. Why did they kill all those Jewish people, Dad? Why are they all naked? How can anyone kill like that? How could people film this and not do something to stop it? It doesn't make sense, Dad. Why would anyone do this?